No kings, no borders, but plenty of demands. Let's unpack the hypocrisy behind the immigration riots and the anti-American protests taking over LA right now. On top of all of this, is the United States about to enter into World War III? All of this we are discussing today on the Voices of Liberty podcast. Welcome back to the Voices of Liberty podcast. My name's Isabel, and I am so thankful that y'all are here with me today again. I am back again with audio only. I'm so sorry, but I am hoping to have videos soon. It's just been a whole process, and there's so much going on in the news and the media right now, and I don't want to keep y'all waiting. I've seen a lot of people ask questions about these things regarding the LA riots and the Iran and Israel war in the Facebook group, and I really just wanted to go ahead and address it because I think it's important. If you're not a part of our Facebook community, y'all should go ahead and join right now. We talk about theology, politics, homemaking, marriage, parenting. We talk about all kinds of stuff. We have great conversations, and we would love to have you. So go to the show notes, and you can easily join the Facebook group there. And I will also say that we have a special guest coming on today to talk about the Iran and Israel war. They're going to be able to explain it and kind of just lay out what they anticipate might be happening and what Trump is potentially doing. And I'm super excited for y'all to hear that. I'm not going to give any spoilers right now. So again, there's just been a lot happening in the news between Israel and Iran, Trump and the LA riots. And then this past weekend, there were the No Kings protests. I have really just been trying to pay attention to the news because every day it changes. There has been so much going on, and I really just wanted to talk about it and give some thoughts regarding it. I did want to give an update, though, on Adriana Smith, because if you listen to my last episode, I did talk about her story and the laws regarding that. And she was removed from life support on Tuesday, and her baby has been delivered via C-section. So baby Chance weighs 1 pound, and he is in the NICU. So y'all just please be in prayer for their family. They are going through a lot right now. They just buried Adriana. Now her baby is in the NICU. So y'all just be in prayer for them. They need a lot of prayer, and just pray for peace and for strength, and that baby Chance would be okay, and that he would be strong, and that he would make it. Before we really dig into this episode, though, I want to say, with all the stuff going on right now, there's a lot going on right now. Spend time in prayer. Spend time in the Word. Seek Him and pray for our leaders, y'all. They're having to make a lot of decisions, and Trump literally has the weight of the world on his shoulders, it seems. Pray for his advisors. Pray for him. Pray for all these people who are involved in making these decisions, because it matters. I also ask that y'all pray for the people in the Middle East and for their salvation. Pray for the leaders of those in the Middle East as well, and that cooler heads would prevail. And pray that the people who are involved in all of this, who may not have asked to be involved in this, like the civilians and people who are just living their everyday lives, pray for them that they would be safe and that they would be saved and that they would come to hear the gospel, because, we don't know when our last day is going to be ever. And so these people need the gospel too, just like we do. So y'all just pray for them. So with all that said, let me go ahead and give y'all the verse of the week this week, because I do think it ties into all of the events going on, everybody's fears and concerns with, America potentially going into World War III. So this verse comes from Psalm 121, verses 1 through 2, and it says, I lift my eyes up to the hills. From where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. So that verse, again, just really ties into all the stuff going on. Take a step back. If you have to stop watching the news for a day or two and just relax and rest in the Lord, that's totally okay. No one's going to fault you for that. Spend time with your family. Spend time in the Word. Spend time with your husband. It's really important. And so it's not good to let the stuff consume us to the point where we become fearful and scared all the time. And so we have to remember that the Lord is in control, and He knows everything that's going to happen. And so we just have to trust that. As Christians, we can look forward to, spending eternity with Christ. Like, we will be with Christ no matter what happens as Christians. And I think that's super important to remember that, no matter what happens to us on this earth, we as Christians will spend eternity with Christ. And I think that is such a beautiful thing to look forward to. All right, so I want to discuss the riots first because, again, there's just a lot going on with that. And I want to start out by saying this. According to the First Amendment, people have every right to protest peacefully for their cause, their values, but the minute that it turns violent, we have an issue. The minute that you are beating police officers, setting cop cars on fire, looting businesses, blocking roads, you are no longer a peaceful protest. What we saw in LA and nationwide, in my opinion, was very violent in some cases. And in my mind, is another example of what we saw during the George Floyd riots, which happened in 2020 and ended up costing over $2 billion in damages. Yeah, $2 billion in damages. So we have to ask the question, what started all of this stuff in LA? Surely something had to set these people over the edge and set them off. The protest started due to ICE arresting some undocumented immigrants in public. This caused a huge outrage amongst people, and the protest quickly turned into a riot. Many of this outrage, though, is because ICE detained undocumented immigrants without a warrant. Now, most people think that ICE has to have a warrant to arrest anyone in public, but this is actually not the case when you look at the laws and things like that. When you look at the Fourth Amendment, it says, "The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized." So, I just want to note, ICE agents work for the federal government. They do not need a search warrant to arrest an illegal immigrant without documentation in public. So this could be while you're driving, walking down the street, in a restaurant, at a school. If you are in public and you are an undocumented immigrant, ICE can legally arrest you. When it comes to entering someone's home, that is a little bit different. They do, in fact, have to have a warrant issued by a judicial judge, which makes sense according to the Fourth Amendment. They can't just barge into your home and arrest you. They have to have a warrant to do that. But if you are in a public area, ICE does not have to have a warrant to arrest you. So a lot of the outrage is due to undocumented immigrants not getting due process as well. I want to talk about what it says about due process in the Fifth Amendment and Section 1 of the 14th Amendment because it is important. I want to read both of these so y'all can kind of see what it says. So the Fifth Amendment says, "No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia, when in actual service in time of war or public danger, nor shall anyone be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation." So that's the Fifth Amendment. Now I'm going to read Section 1 of the 14th Amendment, and it says, "All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States, and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any states deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction of the equal protection of the laws." So, this does not mean that everybody gets the right of due process. There are limitations to this. So if someone commits a crime while they are here in America illegally or even legally, then they get due process, meaning they have to get a trial and they have to go before a judge. But there are some exceptions to this, and we're going to talk about that. These exceptions are called expedited removal. In this case, it means that if someone is within 100 miles of the border or has just come into the country within 14 days, they can be removed without due process. On top of all of this, Trump has just invoked the Alien and Sedition Act that was passed in 1798 due to America potentially going into war with France. I'm not going to read the whole thing of the Alien and Sedition Act of 1798, but I'm going to read the first little part of it. So this is Section 1 of the Alien and Sedition Act. "Be it enacted by the state in the House of Representatives of the United States of America and Congress assembled, that it shall be lawful for the President of the United States at any time during the continuance of this act to order all such aliens as he shall judge dangerous to the peace and safety of the United States, or shall have a reasonable grounds to suspect are concerned in any treasonable or secret machinations against the government thereof, to depart out of the territory of the United States within such a time shall be expressed in such orders." I know I just, read a section of that, but there is a lot more in sections 1 and 2 that talk about immigration. And I encourage you to go and read that on your own time. But this basically just means that Trump has the presidential authority to deport anyone here who is a threat to America, This includes people who are part of gangs, enemy organizations, without giving them due process. So Trump does not have to give these people due process if he believes they are a threat to America. And this is because Trump has invoked the Alien and Sedition Act of 1798. So that's important to also note as well. I am sure we all love to wake up every morning and have a nice hot cup of coffee. Let me ask you something though. What if your daily cup of coffee could actually help save lives? That's exactly what happens when you drink 7 Weeks coffee. It's organic, and every bag helps support a pro-life pregnancy care center across the country. I've made the switch to 7 Weeks coffee, and not only because it is some of the best coffee I've ever had, but because it's also coffee with a mission, literally brewed for life. 7 Weeks Coffee is America's pro-life coffee company on a mission to fund the pro-life movement one cup of coffee at a time. Why are they called 7 Weeks Coffee? Because at 7 weeks, the baby is the size of a coffee bean, and it's the same time a heartbeat is clearly detected on an ultrasound. That is why they donate 10% of every sale to support pregnancy care centers across the country. They have raised over $900,000 for these centers and have saved thousands of lives. Now, I'm going to tell you about the coffee because I'm very picky about what I put into my body. It is mold-free, pesticide-free, shade-grown, low acid, and it's organically farmed. So 7 Weeks Coffee truly checks all of the boxes. Go to 7weekscoffee.com and save 15% forever when you subscribe. Plus, exclusively for my Voices of Liberty listeners, use the code OFFICIALCCW for an extra 10% off your first order. That's a 25% total savings on your first order. Remember, your order will directly go to help support a network of over 1,000 pro-life organizations across the U.S. All right, so the media does not report on this or give facts. They use stories of ICE arresting undocumented immigrants at schools and other public places, which ICE can legally do. Unfortunately, most people don't know that this is legal, and it has caused a huge outrage amongst progressives and even some conservatives, and this has led to the riots. What's even worse is that Gavin Newsom was basically just non-existent during these riots in LA. He basically just sat back and watched his state go up in flames. Trump got involved by deploying the National Guard and even put Marines on standby as well. Gavin Newsom failed to deploy the National Guard, and he even said there was no problem until Trump got involved. What I think is actually really funny is that, Gavin Newsom deployed the National Guard to assist with COVID testing, but yet he failed to deploy the National Guard when his state really needed them the most. Many businesses were looted, cops were disrespected, spat on, and, beat up, and property was ruined. So LA seriously looked like a third world country, y'all. I'm not even joking. What we saw on the news was violence, and in my opinion, an example of where the loyalties of these people lie. We saw many of them waving the flags of the countries that they left and burning the American flag. This, in my opinion, is a huge threat. Because these people are here illegally and they are undocumented. They do not care about us or our country. These other countries could easily use these people as spies or use them against us. So not knowing who is here is a very scary thing, especially right now with what's going on in Iran and Israel. For example, this is known as sleeper cells, and it is a term given to a group of terrorists who are residing in a target population inactive until they are given the orders to act. Think about that. We had open borders during Biden's presidency, and we have no idea who has came to this country. These people live just like all of us. They live normal lives. They try to blend in, but when they are given the orders to act, they will act, and it will not be good. So y'all just remember that. People forget this stuff. Now, I'm not saying that everybody who has came here illegally is bad. I'm sure there are many, many good people who have came here undocumented and illegally that are good people who just want a better life, but it has to be done the right way. Another example I want to give is in Russia, Ukraine smuggled in drones that were explosive. They strategically smuggled in 117 drones and took out a third of Russia's bomber fleet. This was known as Operation Spiderweb. This was planned and easy to do in Russia. Think about that for a second. This was planned and it was easy to pull in Russia. Now, if it was that easy there, how much easier would that be here? I mean, after all, America did have open borders, again, during Biden's presidency. And we have absolutely no clue who has entered into our country. These are things that people really don't consider when it comes to enforcing deportation, closing the border, things like that. We see these people being ripped from their families, and yeah, it's sad. It's horrible. We're told we don't have enough empathy. But we have to do what's best for our country at the same time. When we see these people advocating for illegal immigration, we are typically met with, you have no empathy, no human is illegal, or my favorite, you are living on stolen land. I actually had a girl on Instagram, y'all, literally spam my comments, going off about how I am living on stolen land and I needed to go back to the country where my ancestors came from because it was not America. Funny enough, my ancestors actually did come from here. I have strong Native American roots on my dad's side of the family. I mean, you would never know it from looking at me because I'm really white, but I do. So when she told me that, I literally laughed so hard and I said, then according to your logic, I am exactly where I'm supposed to be, as my ancestors were literally Native Americans. I think she blocked me, honestly, after that. I'm not sure. Typical behavior of progressives on social media. I'm used to it by now. They usually comment something attacking my looks or me personally, and then they block me so I can't even respond. Anyway, I just thought it was really funny because her statement didn't even make any sense. So when it comes to this, I have many things that I want to say. Number one, we are not living on stolen land. Europeans settled in this land, and there literally has never been land where people were not displaced in some shape or form. On top of this, the Native Americans were a small population. They adopted a lot of European ideas and even traded with them. A lot of Native Americans did die from diseases like smallpox, but the Europeans did not know that they were going to be bringing diseases over. This is not something that you can really predict happening. The argument that we are living on stolen land does not stand when you look at history. If this were the logic, then why isn't land everywhere stolen? When you look at this in the context of history, not some magical ideal on how things should be, if you compare what happened to the Native Americans with what happened to others throughout history, you gain a different perspective. What happened to the Native Americans was bad, but not the worst. But you have to put into the context that they were conquered people. Why should we feel guilty for something that we didn't do? We were born into this context. We don't have any obligation to set any past wrongs right. Why is this only suggested in the United States? We are now a nation. So that's something I want y'all to just really consider and think about. Like, we're not living on stolen land. Number two, no human is illegal. Yes, they actually can be illegal. People act like deportation is something new. This is not something new. And in fact, most Democratic presidents and candidates were even in support of deportations until Donald Trump campaigned on it. Examples include Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, and Obama. Obama even said in 2005, quote, "We simply cannot allow people to pour into the United States undetected, undocumented, unchecked, and circumventing the line of people who are waiting patiently, diligently, and lawfully to become immigrants in this country." Okay, so they were all for it. So what's changed? There were no riots, no empathy, and no protests. Obama was known as the deporter-in-chief. So this alone just told me that they're angry that Trump is president and that he's enforcing the law. No country would let you illegally enter, demand free health care, food, and housing, loot businesses, burn cop cars, assault police officers or federal agents, and burn their flag, but wave the flag of the country that you just came from. On top of this, it's definitely not going to help you get a legal status or stay here. So why should the United States be any different? Number three, you have no empathy. There's a big difference between having empathy and completely disregarding the law. Sure, I feel sorry for these people who have came here illegally and are being ripped away from their children. I feel sorry for them. But reality is they made a choice, and this was a potential consequence of that choice. All of our actions have consequences, y'all, good or bad. I would hope and pray that it would be enough to encourage them to do the things the right way, to come here legally and be reunited with their children. The government has also stated that the children can go with them. The people protesting for empathy, however, care more about people who have broken the law, taken advantage of Americans, than they do American citizens. Where was the empathy for Lake and Riley? Where was the empathy for Jocelyn? It was not there from the left. So many women and young girls have been killed or hurt by illegal immigration. It's not loving or empathetic to turn a blind eye to the destruction that illegal immigration has caused. These women mattered. These families mattered. Lakin was going to school to be a nurse, y'all. And her patients will never know the loving and kind soul that she was, because her life was stripped from her. When you talk about these women, we are told that we're just politicizing their deaths. These women died brutal deaths, and they were good people who cared about others. The left had no empathy for them, and Biden couldn't even remember Lake and Riley's name. The left tells us because we talk about them, we are politicizing their deaths, but that's not true at all. We are simply advocating for change. so that what happened to Lake and Riley and Jocelyn and these other women does not happen to any other American citizens. Why should we sacrifice the people who are already here for the benefit of non-citizens? So yes, I do find it hard sometimes to find empathy for people who have broken the law, knowing there are consequences. When an American citizen commits a crime, they are taken from their families, placed in handcuffs, and taken to jail. They do not get to see their children or their families, and if they want a relationship with them after they get out, they have to demonstrate and make choices to do so to show that they're willing to step up for these children and their families after they are released. This is really no different than deportations, in my opinion. The left also says that, ICE agents are racially profiling. Mexico borders America, y'all. There are 11 million suspected undocumented immigrants in the United States, and I'm willing to bet that there is way more than this, to be honest. More than half of these people come from Mexico, and you can literally look this up on the internet, and it will tell you that more than half of these undocumented immigrants are from Mexico. While people think ICE agents are racially profiling, a lot of these undocumented immigrants do live in California and states that do border Mexico. There is more to all of this than what CNN and the media is telling you. While it sucks for these people, actions do have consequences, and these could be good consequences or bad consequences. Now, I do think Trump should focus on the most dangerous people first. I mean, that seems to be a big issue. But at the same time, if you are here illegally, you have broken the law and you can be deported. I also understand not every situation is cut and dry, but in this case, I suggest that we do what we can to follow the existing law. When it comes to illegal immigration, I also see a lot of progressives use scripture to justify illegal immigration. To justify this, they typically use scripture from Leviticus, and it's from Leviticus 19:33-34. When a foreigner resides among you in the land, do not mistreat them. The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself, for you are foreigners in Egypt. I am the Lord your God. All right, now you can easily say that and say that it, applies to illegal immigration, but context matters. Foreigner in this context also means sojourner, who is someone who just visited for a short time, abided by the laws, and eventually went to their home country. So using this verse to justify illegal immigration is not even accurate. On top of this, the context here is when God was giving Moses the laws in the Old Testament to the Jews. So you cannot pick and choose what laws you want to follow and what laws you don't want to follow. If you want to claim that Christians must follow this law, then you better be following all the other ones along with it too, including do not steal, do not lie, do not slander. This could be a whole other podcast episode in and of itself. And, you don't have to agree with me on this, but I operate off of New Covenant theology. And this basically just means that I don't believe that we are bound by the Old Testament laws anymore. We are under the New Covenant. Now, obviously, this does not mean that we just drop everything that the Old Testament teaches, but we are living under the New Covenant under the New Testament. Romans 7:6 tells us, "But now we are released from the law, having died to that which held us captive, so that we serve in the new way of the Spirit and not in the old way of the written code." Y'all, the Jews were required to follow 613 laws given to them. But even then, it wouldn't be enough to fully cover their sin. And that is why Jesus had to come and die for us, because he was the ultimate and perfect sacrifice. All of this in the Old Testament was a foreshadowing of things to come and pointed to something bigger and better, and that is Christ. For example, in the Old Testament, we are told to keep the Sabbath day and keep it holy. This means that you do not work at all on the Sabbath day. There were requirements, for example, that they can only walk so many steps according to the law because it was considered work and things like that on the Sabbath. They could be put to death for not following these laws. Now, under the New Covenant, we are no longer bound by that law. We do not have to keep the Sabbath anymore. We are given two commands in the New Testament. This comes from Mark 12:28-34, and it tells us that what the greatest commandment is. It says, "One of the teachers of the law came and heard them debating. Noticing that Jesus had given them a good answer, he asked him, 'Of all the commandments, which is the most important?' 'The most important one,' answered Jesus, 'is this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is the one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this. Love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these.' 'Well said, teacher,' the man replied. 'You are right in saying that God is one, and there is no other but him. To love him with all your heart, with all your understanding, and with all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself is more important than all the burnt offerings and sacrifices.' When Jesus saw that he had answered wisely, he said to him, 'You are not far from the kingdom of God.' And from then on, no one dared ask him any more questions." Now, Some of you may disagree with me on the New Covenant theology, and that's completely fine. Like, you're entitled to your own opinion. But I believe in New Covenant theology, and even for myself, this has been hard to just comprehend because we are taught differently in the church. But the more that I seek Christ, pray on this, and really just read scripture, it makes so much more sense. So if you want me to do an episode on, New Covenant theology, what I believe, and all that stuff, I absolutely will. But we don't have enough time to go into it today. But again, when it comes to the verse in Leviticus, I do not believe that we are bound by the Old Testament law anymore. We are under the New Covenant. And if you demand that Christians must follow this law, then Christians must be following every other law that's in there as well in the Old Testament. So next, progressives like to use Matthew 25:35-40. But again, context doesn't matter. I'm going to read this, and it says, "For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me." Then the righteous will answer and say to him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in person to go and visit you?" The king will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." All right. So progressives love to use this verse to justify illegal immigration. But this passage is actually talking about persecuted Christians, not illegal immigration. In fact, Romans 13 clearly tells us to follow the laws of the land. So Romans 13:1-7 states, "Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from fear of the one in authority? Then do what is right and you will be commended. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for the rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath, to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to the authorities, not only because of possible punishment, but also as a matter of conscience. This is why you also pay taxes. For the authorities are God's servants who give their full time to governing. Give to everyone what you owe them. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor." So progressives love to use that argument. And, again, Romans 13 clearly tells us to follow the laws of our land. They also like to say that, Jesus was an undocumented immigrant. This is actually not true either. Jesus followed the law. This argument generally makes no sense, and it makes me laugh every time I hear it. Hey y'all, if your family is anything like mine, we've been sick and had runny noses and itchy eyes and just cold-like symptoms for the past few months. When this happens, we take elderberry syrup. Elderberry is known to boost your immune system and help your allergies, and it works wonders. We use elderberry syrup from Gingers at Back to the Basics 101, and it has been such a game changer. Elderberry can be complicated to make and is not known for having good taste, but not Ginger's. Her elderberry comes in a super cute packaging and it is ready to boil. All you have to do is easily transfer the elderberries and cinnamon sticks to the tea bag, tie the end, and boil. Her elderberry tastes amazing too. It honestly tastes like Christmas. Back to the Basics 101 is a small business owned by Johnny and Ginger Butts. They are a farming family who are also believers. Basics, in their name, Back to the Basics 101, is an acronym for Brothers and Sisters in Christ's Service. Ginger believes that when we are saved, discipled, and helped, we can enjoy the abundant life that Jesus talks about in John 10:10. Their family has experienced healing from what Ginger calls modern diseases through God's creation. Back to the Basics 101 produces 4 product lines to help consumers get nutrition from the source. Each of the product lines get you as close to the point of nutrition as possible. For instance, their homemade baking mixes are made from the wheat they grow in Middle Georgia. Ginger then takes the wheat to a miller who raises the gate to his pond, which activates the 4-foot stone mill that grinds their wheat berries into flour. She keeps the process primitive to ensure the consumer gets nutrients at their peak. Their other 3 product lines include Plant and Protein Blend, Elderberries, and More Ultimate Syrup Kit and Seasonings. Be sure to follow Ginger on Facebook and Instagram so that you can see all their small batch products to help make a healthier and happier you. Use the code CCW10 to get 10% off your order today. Go to backtothebasics101.com. Use the code CCW10 for 10% off your order. All right, guys, I know a lot of y'all have been waiting for me to discuss the Israel-Iran topic. The special guest today is my dad. His name is Jared Denton, and, he loves to yap. He loves to talk, and he is well-versed in politics. He's well-versed in what's going on with Israel and Iran, and I had went over to his house last night to basically just have him explain to me what in the world is going on and how I could easily explain it to you guys. But I had written a whole section, and I sent it over to him, and he said, it's really good, but actually, can you just interview me instead? Because I really want to talk about it. So he's going to be talking about the situation in Israel and Iran. And, he is very knowledgeable on this. He, again, is well-versed. He stays on top of the news in Israel and all that stuff. So he knows what he's talking about. He knows his stuff. So with all that said, here is a special guest, and it's my dad. And I hope that y'all enjoy him.
Okay, so Isabella asked me to come and talk some about this Israel-Iran situation, and I'm not going to get into all the details. There's 1,000 nuances to it. So one thing I think is important to understand is the history, at least the history going back to 1917, which prior to World War I, Israel really didn't exist at all. The Jews were kind of dispersed. They called them the diaspora. And they were experiencing a considerable amount of persecution throughout the areas in which they were dispersed, whether it be Europe or other places. And so there were the land that Israel currently occupies was actually controlled and occupied by the Ottoman Empire. And after 1917, the British took over, and they had kind of issued some various declarations. Essentially, I can't remember the names of them, but in which they had determined that the Jews did indeed need a land of their own. It didn't happen until 1948, and part of the reason was because of the Holocaust. So, again, as I said before, there was a considerable amount of persecution that was coming against Jewish population centers throughout the world, and so 1948 was further evidence of the fact that the Jews were indeed being persecuted. And so as a result of the end of World War II, one of the kind of agreements that the world body came to was to establish the nation of Israel, which again, considering the fact that it previously had been occupied, at least prior to World War I, by the Ottoman Empire, there was a large population of Arabs there. And so there is some degree of kind of revisionist history. If you only go back to 1917 and you don't go any further back prior to the Ottoman Empire, then someone might make the argument that, well, the Jews are wrong because they stole the land. But in fact, the other argument could be made as well because the land was stolen from them. And so starting there, right, there's this sense in which you have kind of two different perspectives or views on the nation of Israel. And that's kind of important to understand because either you're going to view Israel through a very theological lens or you're going to view it through a very secular lens. Now, understand that the people in Israel, at least in large part, not all of them because it is a very secular society still, but there is a large number of people that still kind of hold on to this idea of Israel being like God's chosen people and these land promises that were made to Abraham. And so even Benjamin Netanyahu, who is the current president of Israel, would agree. He's said in a number of occasions in various interviews that he's given in which he's recited some of these land promises. And so there's a very theological worldview, from many of their leaders, and that's what you're really contending with now. On the other side of that coin is that you have a nation like Iran who has a completely different theological worldview, and so they clash, and that's where things kind of get convoluted, right? But we're not fighting they're not fighting a secular war. This isn't a war over power or money or oil. It's not a war like that. It's a theological disagreement about the right to Israel to exist, and so there's no way to really talk them off the ledge in that sense. You're not going to be able to offer either one of them anything in return to stand down, so to speak. So over the years, the United States' influence on Israel has been such that we do provide a considerable or substantial amount of economic aid, military weapons, various technologies, and that's to a degree been used as leverage in the past, whereas if Israel decided they wanted to take some sort of action against an adversary and the United States was not in line with that, they would typically comply with whatever the United States' desires were. And that's kind of been the status quo for decades up until President Trump. And at this particular moment in time, President Trump sees Iran as well as others, both our allies and our adversaries, see Iran as a threat should they ever obtain a nuclear weapon. Well, Donald Trump has also suggested that he's not in the business of getting America into new wars. And so the best case scenario is to let Israel fight that war for us and neutralize whatever nuclear threat Iran is presenting or posing to the rest of the world. Now, there is a degree of concern that this is going to turn into a wider conflict. My opinion on that is that if it were, it would have already happened, meaning that the rest of those countries in that region as well, even though publicly they're allied with Iran, they're physically not backing up those statements, meaning that at this point, with as much devastation as Israel has brought to Iran, they haven't stepped in to help. And you have to wonder why. And the reason is because they also, even though publicly, again, they're saying one thing, privately, they recognize the fact that Iran with a nuclear weapon is a threat to the whole region and to the world. And it's partially because of their worldview, right? And again, this isn't the time or the place to get too deep into that, but understanding their worldview and understanding if they had a nuclear weapon, the kind of threat that they would pose to the region and to the world. And so this just turned out to be a perfect opportunity for Israel to diminish that threat. And part of that goes back to October 7th because Hamas, Hezbollah, all of these kind of terrorist entities that have been a kind of a thorn in Israel's side for years are being funded by Iran. And Israel knows that. The United States knows that, which is, again, it's not a secret. Everybody kind of is aware of the fact that Iran has had a significant influence and is funding most of these terrorist organizations that have been attacking Israel nonstop for probably for the last 20 years at least, it seems. And so October 7th was really kind of the catalyst or the spark that kind of lit the flame. And, of course, there's been this constant concern about the enrichment process in Iran as it pertains to this nuclear program. So, again, that's another side of it, right? Benjamin Netanyahu for years has been saying that Iran was close to a nuclear weapon or close to weapons-grade uranium, which is uranium enriched to about 90%. Anything above 60% is not for civilian use. So you can't make an argument that you're enriching uranium for any other purpose other than weapons-grade uranium if you start enriching it above 60%. And so that was the concern, and that's what Benjamin Netanyahu's been saying for years, is that if Iran enriches this uranium and they get to the point where they go above 60% and it's clear that at that point that it's not for civilian use, then they become a threat, an even greater threat to themselves, and that's just based off the statements that come from the Iranian regime, where they have said openly that they desire to wipe Israel off the map. And so Israel learned some lessons from 1948, meaning that they're not going to rely on the international community to come to their defense. It didn't work in World War II, which is evidenced by the fact that millions of Jews were killed in concentration camps, and they're not going to relive that history. So they're not going to rely on the international community to come to their defense. If they feel threatened, they're going to take actions. And again, they've always had the United States as kind of like a big brother in the background, to protect them, or either basically talk them off the ledge if they were on the verge of taking some sort of action. And it's just the situation, the status quo has seemingly changed at this point, particularly because of Donald Trump. And so his whole approach is, again, to prevent the United States from getting into any more major conflicts and to allow those nations to settle matters themselves. And so that's what's happening. And again, it seems like the whole world is up in flames, but at the end of the day, if these other nations were truly supporting Iran, you would think at least that they would already gotten involved, because if the rest of those Middle Eastern countries, at least the ones that are allied with Iran and maybe an adversary of Israel, were to build a coalition that would pose a substantially greater threat to Israel than Iran itself. And that's what Iran's leadership has basically put a call out just in the last week, to create it like an Arab coalition with some of those countries. And there hasn't really been any response from those countries other than just public statements. And so, again, these countries don't want Iran to be nuclear armed. The United States doesn't want Iran to be nuclear armed. Israel certainly doesn't want Iran to be nuclear armed. And so at the end of the day, what's going to end up happening is that Iran is going to be bombed into the dark ages until they either acquiesce and agree that they will no longer pursue any type of nuclear program, or their regime will collapse. And that's a distinct possibility, considering the population of Iran over the last 10 or 15 years has had multiple demonstrations against their government. And again, those people are not happy with their government either. So it's very difficult to stand up and speak out against your government when it's, the end result is probably going to be going to the gallows or some other harsher death, right? So for them to be able to have an opportunity, which again is what Benjamin Netanyahu has said the last week or so, is that the Iranian people have a chance at freedom, and they need to take hold of it. So that's probably going to be the outcome, is that the regime is going to collapse. And that's different in a sense than the United States overthrowing a regime or Israel overthrowing a regime. In doing that, basically what happens is you go in, you take and essentially occupy that country with your military. It requires a degree of boots on the ground. And then you establish or put somebody in the place, just like we did in Iraq, just like we did in Afghanistan, when we sought regime change. So this is different. It's different because Israel is for the most part, neutralized the government. They don't really have much power. It's kind of hard to fight a major war on one front while battling back your population on the other. So this presents the perfect opportunity for the Iranian people to step up and essentially overthrow their own government and establish a government that represents the people. And we'll see what happens. But if the United States does get involved, it's only going to be because of Trump's stated intention all along, and that is that Iran cannot possess a nuclear weapon. So because of the fact that their reactor lies so deep within the mountains in Iran, at least one of the primary reactors, which I think is in Fordo, Iran, and it's estimated in some cases to be a mile below the surface. And so we're the only ones that possess a weapon capable of penetrating that depth, and that's in question as well. And that's something that in these briefings that the president has been in, that they're discussing, was to whether or not it would even be successful to drop these bunker buster bombs. One theory is that if they come over and drop one, creating enough of a explosion, and I guess creating enough of a hole in the mountain that they can come in behind it with a second one and drop a second one into that hole, and hopefully by doing so destroy whatever nuclear capability they had as far as that particular reactor is concerned. So if the United States does get involved, it's obviously to an extent we are involved already in that we're helping to kind of shield Israel from some of the incoming missiles and stuff that are actually being shot at them. But as far as us dropping bombs on Iran, the extent of that is simply going to likely be dropping these bunker buster bombs into that mountain, and that will be the end of it. And Donald Trump's going to let the Israeli people do what the Israeli people feel like they need to do to defend their country. And that's really all that Benjamin Netanyahu has said over and over again, is that they want to be able to defend their borders. There's been this solution that's been presented by a number of U.S. politicians as well as foreign leaders, this idea of having a two-state solution, whereas they break Israel up into two states, allow the Palestinians to populate one side and the Israelis to populate the others. But what happens is when you reduce the borders, you reduce the ability for Israel to defend their borders. And I know that sounds probably backwards, but that's truly actually the case. So there's very little interest in the Israeli part from their perspective to even entertain the idea of a two-state solution. Now, again, there is a concern about, well, what do you do with the Palestinians, right? And so I think that it's going to require a lot of empathy and a lot of understanding. I think that nations will have to open up their borders and the surrounding nations to allow some of those people in. At the end of the day, again, the only way that any real peace is going to come on either side of this war is through faith in Jesus Christ. And so, again, this goes back to the whole ideology, right? Like the theology of the matter is both of their theologies are skewed in Israel and in Iran. And what they both need is to be reconciled first and foremost to Christ, and then they can be reconciled to one another. And they will have true and lasting peace. And so it's foolish for us as Christians to we have to look at it theologically. Oftentimes we're very inconsistent as Christians in what we say and how we think. What I mean by that is, and Jesus, I think, was very clear about this in the Scriptures, specifically when he was talking to the Pharisees, when he suggested that if the Pharisees were Abraham's children, they would be doing the things that Abraham did, and they didn't. And in fact, Jesus said, "You're children of the devil." And so, while I know it's popular for the United States and citizens of the United States to say that God will bless those who bless Israel, I do understand that, but at the end of the day, Jesus was actually not suggesting that Israel was still a nation with borders and a specific identity. What he was suggesting and what the Bible teaches is that the church is the new Israel. And so you have to understand that distinction theologically. The fact is, many of the Israeli people, the Jewish people in Israel, and the diaspora Jews that are not yet back in their homeland are not Christians. And if the truth were told, and I intend to tell it, is that if they died tonight, they would go to hell because they haven't put their faith in Jesus Christ. And the same is true of those in Iran who are Islamic and worship Allah. And so as Christians, we don't need to necessarily look at this as a matter of taking sides between nations. We need to look at it more like Abraham Lincoln said when they came to Abraham Lincoln asking if he would join them in a prayer that God would be on their side as far as the Union Army was concerned. And Abraham Lincoln said, "I will not join you in that prayer, but I will ask that you join me in a prayer that we are on God's side in the matter." And so I think that's really where we need to look, is what side we're on. And if we're not on God's side and we're really just playing this nationalistic game, trying to decide whether or not we're going to support the nation of Israel or maybe in some cases the nation of Iran, or going back to the conversation about the Palestinians, there's a lot of that going on as well in this country where a lot of people are waving Palestinian flags, right? Everybody's identifying with a particular people group, and unfortunately we see this more and more in the church. They're identifying with a people group and not with Christ. And I think that's the distinction that has to be made. So if there's any encouragement in this, one is I don't think we're headed into a wider war. I think that essentially what's happening is the president is trying to prevent the Iranian people from possessing a weapon that could essentially wipe out a whole population of Jews in Israel. And again, we don't want to see that, just simply because we can easily recall the time of the Holocaust, and when we watched millions of Jews, or maybe didn't watch, but we remember the fact that there were millions of Jews that were gassed and shot and killed because they were Jews. And so for just the sake of life, right? Like, we don't want to see Iran possessing a nuclear weapon. And then on the other side of the coin, right, that we can be encouraged by the fact that as Christians, we have this hope. And because we have this hope of Christ, and we have the Word of God, and we have this commission from God to share the gospel, that we have the solution. The solution to peace is not a treaty made between nations. The solution that's going to lead to peace is the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so I would just encourage you to share the gospel and pray for these people, because that's what they truly need, is Jesus Christ.
Do you want a way to boldly share truth with others? Conviction Company has you covered. Their hat collection is so cute, and they also have bracelet socks and sweatshirts as well. I love the hats that I get from them. They are such good quality, and they always spark important conversations. Conviction Company is a family-owned business started by a Midwest stay-at-home mom. Their goal is to provide their customers with high quality and on-trend apparel and accessories that make it easy to boldly share truth and spark important conversations. I have their Make America Healthy Again hat, I have the Save the Babies hat, and I have the One Nation Under God hat, and I absolutely love them. They always spark important conversations, and it's just a way for me to boldly share my values and truth. So go to convictioncompany.com and use the code OFFICIALCCW to get 10% off your order today. Again, that's convictioncompany.com. Use the code OFFICIALCCW to get 10% off your order today. All right, y'all, I just want to leave you with this. Trust the Lord. He is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Men is going to fail us, no matter what. Like, men will fail us, y'all. But the Lord is forever. Hebrews 13:5-6 states, "Don't love money. Be satisfied with what you have. For God has said, I will never fail you. I will never abandon you." So we can say with confidence, "The Lord is my helper, so I will have no fear. What can mere people do to me?" Hebrews 13:5-6. We just have to remember, y'all, that if we're saved, this world is not our home. We have something amazing to look forward to. Sometimes we have to take a break from the headlines and the media and just spend time in God's Word, and that's totally okay and understandable. Spend time in prayer. It's easy to begin to be fearful and put our trust in, our government and in our leaders, instead of trusting the Lord and putting our trust in Him. Again, Proverbs 3:5-6 tells us to trust in the Lord with all our heart and not to lean on our own understanding. I ask that y'all pray for Trump. Believe it or not, he has a lot going on, and he has a lot of hard decisions to make. Pray for the other world leaders to be saved and for them to also not want to be in a war either. Pray for the civilians in the countries affected, and pray for their safety and salvation on top of that. Remember, y'all, this world is not our home. Sometimes it takes not reading the headlines and spending time with the Lord and our family to clear our head and stop being fearful and worrying. I hope that I was able to answer some of y'all's questions regarding, immigration and things like that. And I hope that my dad was able to offer you some encouragement and some insight into the war with Iran and Israel and what's going on, and if America's about to be into World War III. So let me know your thoughts on what I discussed today in the comments below. What are your thoughts on the situation with Israel and Iran? Comment them below. I want to know. I want to see what y'all think. Be sure to tag me if you share the podcast. My Instagram handle is @thepatriotisabel, and I will share your post on my story. And I will send you an exclusive CCW sticker in the mail if you share. Again, y'all, thank you so much for listening to this podcast. I hope it was helpful. And y'all continue to navigate life with liberty, truth, and grace.